following program is classified G. It's suitable for all ages. We would like to remind our viewers that the views expressed in this program by our participating guests are solely viewpoints of them who take part and does not reflect the views and beliefs of the Derana Media Network. This is an opinion-based program.
On an all-new Get Real, Sri Lanka and the world. Faced with a whole plethora of issues stemming from a dollar crisis, once again Sri Lanka's image on the world stage has taken a dent, upsetting its ability to regain its place in the world as a developed state. Fuel lines to gas lines to lines all across for anything, scarcity on essential items seems to be taking shape with a lot of doom and gloom predicted. Despite all this, there's still a daunting fight to keep Sri Lanka alive, be it at the UNHRC or be it at the economic front. For sure, Sri Lanka is fighting. Whilst a battle goes on in the island, true friends of the nation are fighting for a better day too. For insights and analysis on our season's premiere, I'm honored and humbled to be in the midst of a true Sri Lankan, Lord Micheal Naseby.
Real views, real opinions, and for an honest conversation, this is Get Real, and it all starts right now.
From Studio 24, with opinions that matter, it's time to get real with Mahieash Johnney.
And a very good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Get Real, where we continue to discuss issues faced by everyday Sri Lankans. Right now, the level of problems we are undergoing as a nation is absolutely overwhelming. It reached a boiling point last Thursday night when a mob near the president's home asked him to go home when he was already home. We also saw several protests yesterday where many are agitated and is demanding the government to sort things out. However, unfortunately, what we need to realize is that it's not exactly as easy as the many liberal pundits and others who are milking this situation to launch their nefarious agenda as saying. In my opening statement, the fake heroes. Right now, when the country is going through such hardships that are stemming from a supply chain crisis, which is a result of empty coffers, what we need to realize is why is Sri Lanka the way it is right now? It's mainly because of our inconsistency at anything. As Sri Lankans, we are unable to keep anything going in for a longer period of time. We slap the label called Alutem Patangamu and go do the same erroneous actions instead of learning from them and applying them to get to a better place. This has been our story since independence. For some reason, we've seemed to think that if there's a crisis that you and I are facing, let's blame the current government in power, and if no instant solution, let's get rid of them and get the other side in. We keep repeating that vicious cycle. If we look at our voting patterns since we ended the war, first, it was President Mahindra Rajapaksa. He was the one who said he's going to save this nation from the war. He did that and delivered. And then in his second term, he began his development period. No sooner he was developing, in comes the opposition, creating a narrative of corruption this, corruption that. They attributed that to high taxes and fooled the people. Instead of a continuity in 2015, we changed it to the saviors of the liberal clan, led by the clown of all presidents. And during that time, what we should have asked from the Yahapalni is to prove the case you made against the previous president on corruption that led him to be removed from office. When they couldn't do that, and when the nation realized, wait, these guys fooled us, and when they were implementing IMF recommended policies that resulted in high taxes, the same guys who screamed thief back in 2015 went back running to the current president and exalted him to the highest office in the land. Now, when a pandemic has hit this nation and the world, and we are clearly going through an economic cycle, we have not, due to the fact that we have not taken adequate steps to face it, instead of solving it, we now have resorted to scream, "Gora, go home," at a time when he was actually inside his home. What did the mob expect? For him to come out from one door of his house and then go back into his house from another door? The question we need to ask is, how are we going to act as a nation right now in order to solve the problems and get out of it? There are two solutions at hand. Let's all get together, support each other, find solutions, and push this nation out of this crisis. And when we all do that, do you know who benefits? No, not America, no, not the United Kingdom, no China, no India. You and me. We are the ones who will benefit. Or the other simple solution, which we have resorted to many times in the past and have proven to be an utter failure. Scream, shout, be angry, and scoff at the current government and get them out of power and install the other side, who is just as ineffective as the rest, or give the country to a whole new set of liars and uncredible individuals whose only track record was to resort towards an insurgency that burnt people alive. Sri Lanka's problems are not finding a proper solution. Sri Lanka's problem is that we forget. All right, in a moment we will bring you the interview I had with Right Honourable Lord Naseby. He was in the country last week. I was able to sit down with him and have a discussion that will air shortly. But before that, joining me in the studio is our own Danidu Thanawasam. Good to see you. Welcome back to the new season, Danidu. The country is once again at crossroads. We are trying to define our story, and we seem to be hitting the same wall over and over again, at least consistently, since independence. So in order to get out of this, there are lots of opportunities that is at hand, but we don't seem to be having the ability to look into them. So what exactly are you focusing on tonight's real story?
Yes, my sense, I think the service Lord Naseby has done to this country is something that almost everyone knows, and they should know. And based on that, what we are trying to cover from the real story today is the perception outside is not always that favorable. Like Lord Naseby is one singular character, and we are going to talk a bit about these negative impacts and what exactly is the real story basically outside there in terms of perception of this country. Now, Sri Lanka is a country that had displayed a strong will to recover during any parts of its historic crisis situations. But the perception internationally hasn't always been that favorable. The Sri Lankan economy is heavily contingent on the international arena's perception of it. Tourism is the third largest source of foreign exchange for the country behind worker remittances and the apparel industry. There has always been a dichotomy in the representation of Sri Lanka globally. Historically, the war against the LTTE terrorists had left a stain on the image of the country, but having moved on from that, individual nations still exercise personal agendas against Sri Lanka by associating an image of violence and terrorism with our island nation.
A travel advisor which tells the British public, do not contemplate a holiday to Sri Lanka because terrorist violence is likely. I'm quoting the exact sentence from the travel advisor. Terrorist violence is likely. So says the British government. Now, is this true?
The last 3 years have systematically decreased the revenue generated from the tourism industry subsequent to the 2019 Easter Sunday attacks and the coronavirus pandemic. The government has removed majority of the restrictions in place for fully vaccinated tourists coming into Sri Lanka in an attempt to restore its tourism industry, which is slowly picking up but is insufficient to remedy the current economic crisis. But obstacles posed by these international agents continue to curtail these efforts.
Sri Lanka has started 2022 on a rather precarious note. The economy is in a bad shape, so much so that Colombo has had to shut down diplomatic missions, 3 of them. Why? To save foreign reserves and cut costs.
Angry, frustrated and desperate, Sri Lankans surrounded the president's office in Colombo, fed up having to queue for food, medicine, cooking gas and vehicle fuel.
Sri Lanka is not in an ideal position, but it's not as far gone as international agencies it's portrayed to be. While governments exercising personal agendas aimed at pushing negative propaganda about Sri Lanka, international business partners who deal with Sri Lanka manifest a different image. The export industry is a good indicator of the international reception Sri Lanka received. In comparison to January 2020, merchandise, apparel and textile, rubber, electronics, cinnamon, and seafood exports all saw substantial year-on-year growth. During the month of January 2022, exports to the United States of America, Sri Lanka's single largest export destination, and the United Kingdom, our second largest trading partner, also saw substantial growth compared to the month of January 2021. This performance has resulted in an increase in the exports recorded in apparel and textile, which is 42.8%, and pneumatic and retreated rubber tires and tubes, which results in a 26.32% increase. During the month of January 2022, exports to the Free Trade Agreement partners accounted for 7.2% of total merchandise exports, and it increased by 28% to $80.31 million. Exports to the European Union, which comprised 20% of Sri Lanka's exports during the month of January 2022, also increased by a substantial amount. This is the aforementioned dichotomy. The negative perceptions are fueled by political agendas, while the positives are substantiated by tangible quantitative economic facts. A predominantly tourism-based economy has restructured itself to keep with the times. But if the international forces reform its fallacious perception of Sri Lanka, we will be able to restore our tourism industry, which would in turn strengthen our economy to ensure a sustainable financial future. Communication is key, especially when considering the affairs of a nation. As a country, we ought to push the positive trends within the country in order to counter the propaganda that is damaging for Sri Lanka. Mahieash, I believe Lord Naseby put into context exactly how valuable the kind of gem that we live in right now, and that is something you can bring up in the discussion.
Not only that, if you remember, I think about last month when Greg Jacobson was here, who's an American who I think is now in Bali, who has traveled all around the world. He was coming here and telling the simple fact that, you know, people here do not realize that how bad it is in countries like America and in the West. They think that, you know, you can actually live the American dream, but as a person who has lived in such a manner, he attributed to the fact that that is not the case, and there's so much of false narrative that Sri Lankans have fell a victim to. So yeah, it's so true. Thank you very much. All right, let's take a short commercial break. Upon our return, I will sit down with Lord Naseby, one true friend for Sri Lanka, actually, consistently for more than 50 years. He has been our friend through all thick and thin, and try to tell Sri Lanka's story. I will get his views and his views about this country and what he intends to do as we move on. This is our season's premiere of Get Real. We'll be back. Welcome back, everyone, to the season's premiere of Get Real. We're trying to get some context into the conversation we are having about Sri Lanka, how Sri Lanka is perceived around the world, what is our story, what should we tell the world, and where are we coming from. In order to understand who we are, we need to ask that question from anyone outside of this country, because as you know, this day and age, what's happening in Sri Lanka, we see a lot of love for the country being missed by our own people. There is a lack of love for the nation. So apparently, we just need to ask from all around the world, what does it mean to be Sri Lankan? What does it mean to be part of this country, and how does the world see us? There is a long-lasting friend of Sri Lanka who we can ask this question from, and that is none other than the Right Honourable Lord Naseby from the House of Lords in the UK. Last time when we spoke, the world was Lord Naseby was very different. I spoke to you over a machine.
Yes,
Zoom.
I remember.
Exactly. And here we are. I'm so honored to be in front of you and speaking to you, having this conversation with you. You know, lots have changed since then. This time around, you are visiting Sri Lanka in order to launch your new book, which is called Sri Lanka, Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained. It was launched last Tuesday, right here in Colombo. Lord Naseby was there. You just are witnessing the visuals of that event. And this is a recollection of 50 years of friendship with Lord Naseby and Sri Lanka. This book pretty much tells what he has gone through. He came to Sri Lanka somewhere around in 1960s, and he has met all the leaders of our nation since then. Prime Minister Sirimao Bandaranaike, President J.R. Jayawardena, President Ranasinghe Premadasa, D.B. Wijetunga, Chandrika Kumaratunga, Mahinda Rajapaksa, then Maithripala Sirisena, and now the current President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. In fact, the foreword of this book is being written by our former President Chandrika Kumaratunga. It's an honor, sir. Welcome to the program. Welcome to Sri Lanka. There is one question which we do not really have the answer to. You are a British national. You are in the part of the British political establishment. You are right up there. But your love for Sri Lanka is something that we are trying to understand. Why? Why is this, pardon me for saying this, but why is this white dude in UK sitting there at the helm of the political establishment, loving our country? Even we can't find that kind of love among our people for this nation. But you have been consistently being a voice for Sri Lanka. Why?
Well, because it goes back a bit deeper than just that. I shared a study at Bedford School with an Indian boy, a man called Kit Srinivasan, later became India's foreign minister. So I began to get an interest in South Asia. Inevitably, we used to sit a little closer than you and I are. He talked about India, I talked about the UK. We both talked about our love of cricket, which has been a consistent conduit through all my life. Then my father went to Lahore as the architect of the Punjab government. I went to see him.
This was back when?
This is in the 50s. So in the summer of 55, I'm a schoolboy finishing school, and I go out to Pakistan to see my parents. I'm very lucky that my father had arranged that I could take part in a government scheme, because he was a public servant, to learn to fly. So I learned to fly, found I was quite good at it, and I came back to the UK. And in those days, we, young men, had to do military service, 2 years. I did mine in the RAF. I became an RAF pilot. Then I went to Cambridge. And then a very important dimension was a man, Professor Rostow, from the States, had written a book called The Stages of Growth. And that was focused on countries that were coming basically out of poverty, through the stages of growth to become modern civilizations. And that was a catalyst for me, building on an inherent love of the whole of South Asia. So after reading economics and got a good degree, I joined the Reckitt and Coleman group. I talked about maybe I'd join in Unilever and one or two others, but I chose Reckitt and Coleman, and I asked to go to South Asia. As it happened, I was sent to Calcutta in West Bengal as assistant sales manager. I took O-level Hindi. I'm very proud that I have an O-level Hindi. The only problem today is it gets mixed up with my French. The French taxi drivers don't understand Hindi. But at any rate, I was working there normally. looking after Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Orissa, obviously West Bengal. And one morning my boss calls me in and says, Michael, you're doing a good job. Oh, thank you. I thought, why am I being called in? And then he said, well, that's the good news. The bad news is you and your wife and the baby and your dog and the, and the shotgun, because I used to enjoy duck shooting, you've got to go to Colombo on Friday. On Friday, sir, that's, you know, this is only Monday. Yes, I'm very sorry. The Borough Saab has the chief executive is on holiday, and the deputy has been doing alleged illegal gem dealing. So he's been sent home. So I came down into Ratmalana Airport, and what a thrill to read that Ratmalana Airport is now an international airport. You should be very proud of that.
Were you the person who took the last flight into that airport back in the 50s? Because since then, for 5 decades, that airport was just a domestic airport, and recently we opened it. That is a fascinating story. So you are here in Sri Lanka, and then you start to work here in Sri Lanka? Or?
Yes, no, I had 7 months I was in charge. I've been to parts of Sri Lanka you've never been to. I've been to every market in those 7 months. I did, obviously you had the rest houses in those days.
Yes.
But you also had circuit bungalows. So I did a deal with the government that I was selling them Dettol and Disprin. I said, can I please stay in the circuit bungalows? So anyway, they agreed I could stay at the circuit bungalows. So I used to hire a bicycle rickshaw, go and see the main dealer in the market, 5:30 in the evening, go and see the chief dealer, then call on some other important people in the market. I drank so much Fanta or Coke, and it's all your fault that I love cashew nuts. I'm still loving cashew nuts. And so that was my 7 months here, and I left, and the important bit of that was that I met a man called Ananda Datisat Alwis, who was in charge of the advertising for your biggest advertising agency. He and I played tennis. I'm still a member at Wimbledon. He played good tennis, I played good tennis. Very competitive. And when I sent my wife home, because Mrs. B wouldn't allow my wife to practice as a doctor, she said, no, you had enough doctors. You didn't need any white doctors. So my wife was a little upset, although she did some free work with a lady called Mrs. Tilipandi, or Dr. Tilipandi, was doing some trials on the pill. So anyway, I sent my wife home and said, okay, we've done 5 years with Reckitt's. I'll join an advertising agency, the other side of the marketing. And so she went home with the baby. We left the dog here. And I had about 6 weeks on my own. And Ananda invited me to come to his home with his mother cooking curry. And he was standing for Parliament. So we did all these exercises on how he was going to do a campaign, etc. So that was half his reason that I got involved in politics. I'd never been involved at university. So I get home, and foolish lady, my wife, invites her best friend, who was another doctor, and her husband was running the Conservative Party campaign in London. And he said, what are you going to do in your vacation? I said, I look after the little boy, nothing else. I'm looking for a job. And he said, well, would you like to come and help? So I said, yeah, okay, I'll help. And I helped. And that's the story of how I got into politics. So it's all your fault. I mean, otherwise, I'd have been a normal commercial man.
Exactly. Your friend later became one of our speakers of the,
he did, indeed.
The Parliament. Lord Naseby, now 50 years you've known this country. You've known it during the good old days, you've known it during the conflict, you've known it at the end of the conflict, and you have known about this country when we are fighting the world in order to prove our case. What do you think, what is your honest view from what it was, that Sri Lanka that you saw when you came in the 60s in order to solve a crisis here, from that point to what it is right now? What is your honest view of this country?
I think it's a very talented country. I look at your young people today, and think, gosh, there's some real talent here. I mean, you may not even realise that the software for the London Stock Exchange was Sri Lankan stock.
Yes.
You know, and that goes back a bit. And I look at the talent of your people. It's good. The boys and the girls, the young people, and they have a work ethic second to none, and it's very exciting for me. You know, I'm an older man now. Here am I, 85. Okay, I'm doing okay for 85, but
Very, very bad.
and it's that talent that I want to see working around the world. And you have an outward looking, your young people look outwards. And that in itself is very, very exciting. That we don't have in the UK quite as much outward looking that you do. Partly because you're a small country, and because therefore there's a constraint on what the opportunities are on the ground. But so I find that very, very exciting. And they're nice people.
Of course. There is hope in that. Let me touch on one of the key things that you've been vocal about, the war and the conflict, the bogus allegations about human rights violations, so on and so forth. You've met the political leadership right throughout. You've been with them, you advised them, you met them in London, you met them in various parts of the world, you met them in Geneva. You've been a constant voice of saying, no, there was no human rights violations in Sri Lanka. These allegations that have been put forward is bogus. And you have been very consistent. You have made speech after speech at the House of Lords. Every television station where you sit, if they ask this question, you very well consistently have been telling that story. What is that? What is the thing that you understand, and which you have completely touched on this book as well, that the rest of the world is not understanding?
I think the difference is that I have an inquiring mind. I make sure that I ask difficult questions. I want a straight answer from people. If I don't get a straight answer, I'm very persistent. And in the case of your own challenges, I've watched from the period when I got to Parliament in '74 right through to today, the tension between the Tamil community in particular and an element of that. I mean, I look back to the Tamil leadership I met when I first came out, and when I first came out, I had started what we call an all-party group. They've been for an all-party group for quite a long time, for India, Pakistan, Malaysia. When I got to Parliament, there wasn't one for Sri Lanka, so I started that. I got Betty Boothroyd involved. That is a former Speaker of our Parliament, Labour lady. Still another one who is a very close friend of your country. So I tried hard to understand what the problem was. Yes, I could see language was a problem. And certainly I was one of those who suggested, and I only ever suggest, I'm an outsider, I'm not here to dictate at all. I make suggestions. And we now see the results of it, that all the road signs are in 3 languages. But more importantly, of course, the first stage was really to make sure that all official publications were in Tamil and, as well. So it was a gradation of that language was really important. But it's been achieved now. You've done that properly. The tension was really that for some reason, and I met, say, a man like Amrathingan, who used to be the leader of the Tamil group in Parliament, modest man you could talk to, went to see him in his own home. Why that particular era of more modest, moderate Tamil leaders were removed by this very left-wing, very strong, almost vicious element of the LTTE. How that came about, I don't fully understand to this day, but it did, and it was the biggest tragedy for Sri Lanka, and that's what we've been living with.
You've studied what happened during the wartime.
Yes.
You have gone through, you have spoken to military attaches who were here in Sri Lanka, you inquired with them, and your findings is completely against what the diaspora is saying, what the UNHRC is saying. UNHRC is putting a figure of around 40,000 people. You are bringing that down to saying around 6,000, 7,000, maximum 10,000. But that is war casualty. You see that happening all around the world if there is a conflict. We are seeing that right now in Ukraine and Russia in that conflict. Why is the world body or the UNHRC or all these organizations is hell-bent on that particular aspect of it, where they say no war crimes occurred, and you as an individual who sees this thing completely differently, what's the disparity between these two arguments?
I don't really know the answer to that. All I know is that the evidence I have worked on is a combination of the dispatches from Colonel Gash, who was the British military attaché, the dispatches from the resident US ambassador here, the UN in-house here, their viewpoint, and some respected journalists like the man from Die Spiegel, so that's a German journalist, across a whole spectrum of people who recognize that. And remember, your army is partially trained by the UK, and you have respected that, the rules of war. The real point, I suspect, is that it was a war. It was not a human rights violation. It was a war. And the rules of war are very different from internal human rights arising, something like that. And for some reason, the LTTE in there managed to convince the parties in the rest of the world that it was just an uprising, not a war. You had a very famous lawyer, Sir Desmond de Silva, sadly no longer with us,
yes,
who made it quite clear. And he was really the catalyst for the settlement of the Irish issue between North and Southern Ireland. Quite clear that it's a war. So if anybody should be involved, it should be The Hague, not Geneva. So that's first problem. Second problem is that the UN sets up an inquiry, ending up with a report called the Darasman Report. I can't read the evidence. I don't know who the people were. Nobody knows who gave the evidence. The whole evidence could have been entirely from the LTTE, for all I know, and for anybody knows. But they're the people who made the claim of 40,000. Reliable evidence, they say. Well,
if it is reliable, then be transparent.
Well, totally transparent in life. You can't make a claim without. I can't stand up in Parliament and say X, Y, or Z without actually offering what the source of that my claim is. And the second report was Oisel, which was a bigger report, but again they used the basis of Darasman, and their allegations. They're all allegations, and so
unproven,
totally unproven. And then I look at Colonel Gash, and I thought I didn't think immediately. I don't know why I didn't think of it immediately, but after a year or a couple of years, I suddenly thought, I wonder what his dispatches said. So I had to go through. I asked to see them. Well, that was turned down. Then I said, okay, this is serious. So I look up what I can do, and I discover there's a Freedom of Information Act. So I take some advice from a good friendly lawyer in Parliament, and he said, yeah, you've got a good case, make it. So I make it my case to the Foreign Office, turned down. I appeal, turned down, reviewed, turned down, go to the highest authority in the Foreign Office, turned down. Then I discover that there is actually an appeal mechanism in the Act outside of the Foreign Office. So I go to that guy, he listens, and he says, I said to him, there's 500,000 Sri Lankans in the UK, right across the political spectrum. They have a right. They're here as British citizens now. They have a right to know what happened in that war. You're right, he said. So he goes to the Foreign Office. He said to me, leave it with me for 2 or 3 months, which I did. And he came back and said, yep, they're conceding. So then get a batch of some 26 pages. I look at those. They're heavily redacted, but there's some good information in there. Now I look at the dates, and the dates, towards the end, I thought, where are the dispatches for April and early May? Because the whole thing finished, as you know, from May the 18th. And so I would say to my friend now, what happened? Did Colonel Gash go on holiday? That's not very likely, is it? So we make a further inquiry, and the Foreign Office say, oh, we're terribly sorry, this is on a different computer. So another 11 arrive for that period. And in my judgment, those, even in their redacted stage, they do demonstrate that the Sri Lankan Armed Forces acted properly, and we've had other people have looked at it as well, and I thought that was the end of the thing, but it wasn't.
It wasn't.
Let me just add finally one other thing on Colonel Gash. I'm now told by my government that Colonel Gash, his dispatches cannot be verified. Now, this is the first I've ever heard that an experienced military man has to be challenged as to what he saw.
That shows calculated effort by an unforeseen element who's trying to narrate the whole thing in the way they want, rather than go with evidence and what you really have. Even for them to go to the level of saying that their own serviceman is false or accuse that person, that shows some kind of very cheap tactic in order to prove what they want to do, which they know is a lie. Let's take a short commercial break. I'm in conversation with the Right Honourable Lord Naseby, the author of the book Sri Lanka, Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained, which is available now, which you can actually purchase it from your local bookstore and try to go through this. This is more than 5 decades of friendship, and there is a lot of golden information with regard to what Sri Lanka has gone through and what we as a nation needs to understand when we keep fighting the world on the wrong narrative, the incorrect narrative of our country. Let's take a short commercial break. You're watching Get Real. We'll be right back. Welcome back everyone to Get Real. I'm in conversation with Lord Naseby, Lord Micheal Naseby of the House of Lords. He is the author of Sri Lanka, Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained, which talks about over 50 years of relationship with Sri Lanka. One of the things we just spoke about is the UNHRC matter and the allegations against Sri Lanka. Lord Naseby, you've been a consistent voice against that bogus claims. Now, one of the things that I really like to get your opinion on is, why haven't our government, you have been just a lone voice in UK. There are no other people who are replicating this voice in that particular parliament, in that particular establishment, purely because our governments are not quoting them. Our governments are not going and building the relationship that is required in order to get that voice stronger and stronger and stronger. We see that is being done from the other side. The LTTE sympathizing diaspora is very much doing that on a daily basis. They have reached the higher levels of UK government, they have reached the higher levels of the UNHRC. All that is occurring. In your opinion, why haven't we been able to crack that code and try to put our voice as the supreme voice in order to drown out all these lies?
Well, principally because the LTTE in its earlier days was very strong, and they made sure that they raised sufficient finance, partly by extortion, by other means, illegal dealings, etc. And you have a situation where the war chest that the LTTE have today is huge. And therefore you've got a diaspora, particularly that element. Not all the Tamils in the UK at all. There's a relatively, I don't know what the proportion is, maybe a quarter, something of that sort. And not just here in the UK. Remember, you've got a bigger voice in Canada, where I trained as an RAF pilot. I know Canada a bit. And I have some contact with what's happening in Canada. You have big voice again in the States. And you could add to that Germany, France, everywhere throughout the main economies of the Western world, there is a well-paid voice of the LTTE. And that's a huge challenge for any government, let alone a government of you are a small country, and you're not exactly right there. You know, I know your country well, but the average person in Canada or the UK or anyone doesn't know. They'll know Sri Lanka probably
cricket.
Basically for cricket, basically for wonderful holidays and tourism. Yeah. So it's a huge task for any government here to try and keep the initiative. So my role is to help try and keep that. But we have to bite on the bullet now. I have faith in your present government, in what they're trying to do in setting up some form of truth and reconciliation commission.
You're an ardent, vocal individual on that particular aspect of things. Why do you say that it is relevant, we need to establish that?
I say that because I worked as a junior minister in Northern Ireland, where you had the problem between the Catholics and the Protestants. And that was nearly solved. It really, yes, solved, by people actually making sure that the truth did come out about Bloody Sunday and other problems in that particular field. That came out with the help of, actually, amongst others, the late Sir Desmond de Silva that I mentioned earlier, and other parties. And you have to find a vehicle that's going to bring the reconciliation about. And the people who make the statements have to be protected. So if somebody's done something wrong, if they've murdered somebody else, in a truth and reconciliation, that has to come out, and it has to be recognized that you don't immediately prosecute those people.
Is that what you are advising this government?
That is what I shall be advising. Now, the UNHRC are saying that they want something similar, but it has to have foreign involvement. That can't happen. It won't work.
Why?
It won't work because any country has faith in their own people. You've got responsible, good Sri Lankans who are not biased. There are several I can think of that over time who've been world figures. You can find some reliable judges. You demonstrated not so very long ago when there was an argument here against the government, and you went to the appeal mechanism, and the Parliament stuck by the results of the appeal, although it was not in favour of what they wanted. So you've already proved that you'll respond properly. So I believe, quite frankly, that you've got good people here. It's got to be across the divides of language, of ethnicity, etc.
You strongly believe the only solution for this issue lies within Sri Lanka?
Yes, I do. Yeah, but it's got to be done by people who are recognised externally as well that they are reliable people. It was done in Colombia. So you've got a case history there where it was done. The Colombians didn't have a whole lot of people coming from outside to do it, and their problem was every bit as difficult as yours. So there's a case history there. And that's what I will be suggesting when I am meeting with the President, the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition. I don't take sides. I mean, I'm not here to take sides in the political parties. I'm here to try and help the people of Sri Lanka, in particular, the young people. They are your future. Very talented young people here.
It is fascinating and heartwarming also to see that an outsider of this country appreciating what we have, whereas at this moment in time, where the entire nation is undergoing a severe hardship economically, instead of understanding that coming together, rallying together, fighting it together is the only way we can solve it, we are again letting foreign elements to come in and infiltrate and do their agenda and try to pretty much create the same scenario that was created back when that led towards the war. It is sad to see that, but it is very heartening and fascinating to see an individual of your caliber telling and still believing in our people and our people's ability to get out of this. I appreciate that as a Sri Lankan citizen, and I wholeheartedly thank you for that. Let's talk about the future. Where do you see Sri Lanka heading to? Because right now there's an economic crisis. The United Kingdom can be a country that can help us. We are not talking to them in a manner that we should. We have this mentality because they attacked us during the UNHRC process and so on and so forth. We look at that as a very hostile a friend who would not allow us to do what we need to do right now. How can you bridge that gap? How can you be that conduit where we actually, work together? Because it is not about the West is bad and the East is good or something of that sort. Everybody should be friends with everyone. So how can we bridge that gap?
Well, it's quite a challenge, I must say. I obviously see Lord Ahmad, who came on a visit. He came away, actually, in my judgment, with a more positive understanding than he hasn't admitted this to me, that it's my reading of it, than he originally thought he would do. I think I have to try and persuade him that there's a lot of good here. There's a lot of goodwill in England. I come out on the aeroplane on last Sunday. The economy class was full of people. We're going to have a nice holiday here. So there's goodwill, and I have to keep hammering away. And I come back to the gash thing. I'm not going to stop now and be told that the military attaché needs to have somebody verify his work. And if it's so useless, in quotes, then why not remove all redactions? Or if there's a problem telling me, as an active politician, why can't they just say, yes, this is such an important issue, we will remove the redactions and show them just to the UNHRC and to the Sri Lankan government. I'm not going to complain that. I'm not going on my high horse. That seems to me, I can't see what's against that. I know Madame Bachelet, as it happens. I run in the UK, I organise in the UK an organisation called the Cofradía del Vino Chileno. They've given me an award in Chile for what I've done for the wine industry. So I know her a little bit, I've met her.
Maybe next time you should bring
nobody will let me go out and give evidence in Geneva. I said, I'll pay. I don't want anybody to pay. I'll go under my own steam. But I can't get anybody to really accept that I can come. So I'll pull back. If the UNHRC has those dispatches with no redactions in, they must make their judgment on it. And it's only fair and equal that your party, your country, sees them as well. Maybe only at the highest level. But that has to be done, I think. And the other element is the good work you're beginning to do now, and particularly with the drive of GL Peiris, which is to make sure this missing persons does work. You know, they now say they're down to 15,000. I'm seeing the leaders who are doing that work. We have to bring that to fruition. I think the reparations has gone quite well, and that's good. So I'm going to go through all those elements while I'm here, and so that I can then be a voice in our parliament as to what's happening and refute the anti-Sri Lanka propaganda coming from the LTTE.
That is absolutely true. Once again, I appreciate Lord Naseby for all that, what you said and what you have. The faith of you in the people of Sri Lanka has not diminished, and that is something very heartwarming to see, because what we need is friends all around the world, and we have found one in you. That is very appreciative. Let's take a short commercial break. When I come back, I want to talk about something very interesting here, and I know you are a sportsman as well in terms of playing cricket. What he has done for our Galle Cricket Stadium right after the tsunami in order to get it rebuilt. Lots more to discuss with Lord Micheal Naseby. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. I'm in conversation with the author of this book, Sri Lanka, Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained, Lord Micheal Naseby from the House of Lords in the UK. We've been talking about exactly his viewpoint with regard to the bogus allegations made against Sri Lanka and what he thinks that this government should do. A lot of absolutely golden advice to the current government, and I'm sure he has relayed the same to the hierarchy when he had his conversation during his time here in Sri Lanka. One of the things, one of the interesting parts of this book is the fact that, you know, how much you love cricket and how much you have bridged the gap between the United Kingdom and Sri Lanka in order to keep this sport something that is very much beneficial for both nations. Talk about it a little bit, sir.
Well, it all arose really because I got to know Gamini Dissanayake quite well. And what a loss to your country.
Yes.
And just by the by, that age group was decimated. Lalit Atalmalhaldi,
Yes.
And Gamini and others, been in my home in the UK, gone. Any rate, before the tragedy struck, I discovered that he was interested in cricket. And I didn't play very good cricket. I played very good tennis, but not very good cricket. But I loved the game, and I became a member of the MCC, which are the guardians of the laws of cricket. I was captain of the parliamentary cricket team.
It's now
and at any rate, he and I sit down, and I say, well, why isn't Sri Lanka in world cricket? And he said, well, we'll try and get into world cricket if we knew what we should do. I said, well, we just need to get organised, come on. I said, I'll look after the UK. So I will make sure that I see the body of before the current ECB, the MCC, the sports department of the central government, and anybody else who's relevant. You have to look after particularly India, Pakistan,
yes.
And between us we'll do Australia, who were also there. So we set about it. It took us about 3 years, I suppose, of negotiations. And then joy of joy, the very first test match at Lord's, I go to the first day there. And to this day, Witty Mooney, your opening batsman, still scored more runs on the first opening day of any test match, and nobody's defeated that figure yet. And people love the style of cricket here.
Yes.
You've got a very attacking style, lovely bowling. So both aspects, batting and bowling, the public love watching you. And
even in the UK,
and it's a real ambassador for Sri Lanka. And now we have a situation where I'm president of Northamptonshire County Cricket Club, one of our 18 counties. We are doing some pioneering work for pathways. For instance, in Luton, which is a town about 25 miles away from Northampton, which is where I represented. We have a pathway from a small academy there through to our main academy. We do have a link now. We're helping Singapore, who will also want to have test status. So I'm helping a little bit there. It's a very exciting time for cricket.
You mentioned that MCC was the lords of cricket, who are the guardians of cricket, and during that time and right now, I think in 2020, Kumar Sangakkara was the chairman. He headed. Sri Lankan was heading that entire thing, so that is an achievement as well. Finally, Lord Naseby, in order to wrap up, what is the message you have for the people of Sri Lanka?
I think that at this point in time, there's a great fear out there, possibly even some anger. I'm an economist. We devalued under Harold Wilson. So we've been through it. The world is facing a huge number of challenges at the moment. And I look around, quite frankly, your petrol is an awful lot cheaper than the petrol I'm paying in the UK. So people may find it expensive, but I can tell you that we're considerably more expensive than you are. So we're all facing some problems at the moment.
What is the ray of hope for us?
Oh, yeah, you have to travel with hope. And again, it's the young people who've got to do it. You've got to have some good leadership, and you now have some politicians with that ability to do it. And I hope the opposition is working here as they did it in the UK. There was a bit of tension in the Wilson period, but we came through that because both parties acknowledged that they had to stabilise the situation. So I would hope that the opposition here would do that degree of cooperation and take it forward and then move forward. And the future's yours. Very exciting it can be.
Certainly. Lord Micheal Naseby, thank you very much. It was a lovely conversation, and thank you very much for being candid with me and trying to give your honest opinion and honest take on where things are. I hope to speak to you once again, just like this, when you come back to Sri Lanka. Please visit us again and try to keep this entire dialogue going. I appreciate it, and I thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, that's all the time we have for you tonight. I was in conversation with the author of the book Sri Lanka, Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained by Lord Micheal Naseby. Over 50 years of relationship with Sri Lanka, now available at your local bookstores. You can actually buy a copy and get to know how Sri Lanka was and where we can actually get to with all this crisis. That's all the time we have for you tonight. Thank you very much for watching. As always, remember to stay positive, test negative. I'll see you next time. Good night. You better make it soon before you break my